For months, conventional bombs had bounced off fortresses like Valentin, thousands of tons of high explosives, hundreds of sorties. Nothing worked. The concrete laughed at the Royal Air Force, but tonight, something different hangs beneath these Lancasters. 13 of them carry a weapon the world has never seen used in combat, a 10-ton monster called the Grand Slam. And as squadron leader John Fauquier banks his aircraft toward the target, he carries with him the obsession of one man, an engineer who had spent years dreaming of bombs that could make the Earth itself tremble. If you find this story of engineering genius and aerial warfare as fascinating as we do, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Your support helps us bring more deep dives into military history. The story of how the Grand Slam and its smaller sibling, the Tallboy, came to punch through fortress concrete begins not with a bomb, but with a man who understood structures better than almost anyone alive. Barnes Wallis was an aviation engineer for Vickers. He had designed the geodetic airframes that made the Wellington bomber so resilient. He understood stress, he understood materials, and most importantly, he understood how things break. In 1941, as German U-boats strangled Britain's Atlantic lifelines, Wallis began writing a paper that would change aerial warfare forever. He called it A Note on a Method of Attacking the Axis Powers. The premise was elegantly simple, yet revolutionary. Conventional bombs were wasteful. They exploded on contact, dispersing their energy through the air. Most of that destructive force dissipated harmlessly. But what if a bomb could penetrate deep into the earth, then explode? The ground itself would transmit the shockwave. Every joule of energy would transfer directly into the target's foundations. The earth would become the weapon. Wallis envisioned massive bombs dropped from extreme altitudes, bombs so aerodynamically perfect they would reach supersonic speeds during their fall, bombs so heavily constructed they could survive impact and burrow deep underground before detonating. He calculated that a 10-ton bomb dropped from 40,000 feet would create what he called an earthquake effect. It would not need to hit a target directly. A near miss would be just as devastating. The explosion would create a camouflage, an underground cavern, and the target would simply collapse into the void. The Air Ministry listened. Then they hesitated. A 10-ton bomb required an aircraft that did not exist. Wallis designed one, the Victory Bomber, a 50-ton machine that could fly at 320 miles per hour at 45,000 feet. But by 1942, the Air Ministry had rejected it. They wanted conventional bombers, lots of them, not specialized aircraft carrying single weapons. Wallis might have been forgotten. His earthquake bombs might have remained theoretical curiosities. But then came Operation Chastise, the dams raid. Wallis's bouncing bomb had breached the Mona and Eder dams in May 1943. The destruction was tremendous, the propaganda value even greater. Suddenly, Barnes Wallis was a celebrity. More importantly, he had credibility. When he spoke, people listened, and Wallis spoke about his earthquake bombs. The Royal Air Force could not build the Victory Bomber, but perhaps they could scale down the concept. Wallis went back to his calculations. If a 10-ton bomb was ideal, what could a smaller weapon accomplish? He designed a bomb weighing 12,000 pounds, roughly 5.5 tons. He called it Tallboy. It was not his dream weapon, but it was achievable. The Tallboy was unlike any bomb that had come before. Most British bombs of the era were essentially steel containers packed with explosive. Their casings were thin, designed to maximize the ratio of explosive to total weight. They shattered on impact, spreading their blast across the surface. Effective against soft targets, useless against hardened fortifications. The Tallboy reversed this philosophy. Its casing was made from a single piece of high-tensile steel cast with painstaking precision. The nose incorporated a specially hardened steel plug. The entire weapon was designed to survive impact at speeds exceeding 750 miles per hour. Where conventional bombs broke apart, the Tallboy would penetrate. The aerodynamics were equally revolutionary. The bomb's tail section comprised nearly half its total length. The fins were angled slightly, causing the weapon to spin as it fell. This gyroscopic effect prevented tumbling, much like a rifle bullet remained stable in flight. The result was exceptional accuracy and maximum terminal velocity. A Tallboy dropped from 18,000 feet would hit the ground traveling faster than sound. Manufacturing these weapons was an exercise in precision engineering. Each bomb was essentially handmade. The casing had to be cast perfectly, with no flaws that could cause failure on impact. The nose plug had to be machined and mated precisely. The ogive, the curved nose section, had to be perfectly symmetrical. Any imperfection would destroy the weapon's aerodynamic performance. The explosive filling was equally demanding. Workers poured Torpex, a mixture more powerful than TNT, into the upturned casing by hand, bucket by bucket. A layer of pure TNT sealed the top. Then came the fusing system. 3 separate fuses guaranteed detonation even if 2 failed. The time delay could be set from 30 seconds to 30 minutes, giving the bomb time to penetrate before exploding. Each Tallboy cost as much as a small house. They were so valuable that crews were ordered never to jettison them. If weather forced an abort, if the target was obscured, the bomb had to come home. The additional risk to aircrew was considered acceptable. These were not expendable munitions. They were precision instruments of destruction. The modified Lancasters that carried them were equally specialized. The bomb bay doors had to be removed entirely. The standard Lancaster could not lift the weight. Armor plating came out. Defensive armaments were reduced. Some crew positions were eliminated. The aircraft became vulnerable, stripped down, barely able to maneuver, but they could carry the earthquake bomb. 617 Squadron became the Tallboy Specialists. These were the dam-busters, already proven in precision bombing. Their crews trained obsessively with the Stabilizing Automatic Bomb Sight, the SABS. This complex optical instrument allowed accuracy impossible with standard bomb sights. Corrections for temperature, wind speed, and aircraft motion had to be calculated constantly. The sight was effective only when the target was clearly visible. Cloud cover meant failure. The first operational Tallboy dropped on June 8, 1944, 2 days after D-Day. The target was a railway tunnel near Saumur, France. German panzer reinforcements were expected to use it to reach Normandy. Conventional bombing could not collapse a tunnel buried 60 feet underground. 22 Lancasters of 617 Squadron took off that night. They found the target. They released their weapons. One Tallboy bored straight through the hillside. It penetrated 60 feet of solid rock before detonating inside the tunnel itself. The explosion caused a massive underground collapse. The railway line was destroyed. The panzers never came through. Word spread quickly through Bomber Command. The earthquake bomb worked. The following week saw Tallboys deployed against the German V-weapon program. The Third Reich was launching V-1 flying bombs against London. V-2 rockets would follow. The launch sites and assembly bunkers were protected by massive concrete fortifications. Conventional bombs accomplished nothing. On June 19th, 617 Squadron attacked Watten. The nearest Tallboy landed 50 yards from the target. It did not need to hit directly. The earthquake effect undermined the foundations. The heavily fortified V-2 launch site was rendered useless. 5 days later, Wizerns, a V-2 assembly bunker topped by a massive concrete dome. Several Tallboys struck nearby. The ground shook. The foundations shifted. The dome moved out of alignment. German engineers abandoned the site as inoperable. At Mimoyekes, Tallboys revealed a secret weapon the Allies had not even known existed. The bombs collapsed galleries and blocked shafts. When ground forces arrived in September, they discovered the V3 cannon, a multi-barreled weapon designed to bombard London from across the Channel. The Tallboys had destroyed it before it ever fired. This is the kind of historical detail that can only be appreciated with the full context. If you are enjoying this exploration of World War II engineering and combat operations, please drop a like on this video. It helps the channel tremendously and allows us to continue producing content like this. The Tallboys that struck hardened fortifications revealed both their power and their limitations. When they hit Earth and detonated underground, they devastated everything within their earthquake radius. But when they struck reinforced concrete directly, the results were less predictable. Sometimes they penetrated. Sometimes the casing cracked on impact. This discovery had profound implications. The U-boat pens along the French Atlantic coast had resisted every conventional attack. Brest, Lorient, La Pallice, Saint-Nazaire. These fortresses protected submarines that were strangling Britain's supply lines. Their roofs were made from reinforced concrete up to 12 feet thick. Bombs simply bounced off. On August 5, 1944, 15 Lancasters of 617 Squadron attacked Brest. They scored 6 direct hits with Tallboys. Some penetrated the concrete roofs. Others created such violent earthquake effects that they damaged pens from near misses. The Germans were shocked. For the first time, their impregnable bunkers had been breached. The response was predictable. German engineers began reinforcing other U-boat pens with even thicker concrete. But this diverted enormous resources from other projects. Every cubic meter of concrete poured onto submarine shelters was a meter not used for other fortifications. The Tallboy was winning even when it did not hit its target. Then came the Tirpitz. The German battleship Tirpitz was the sister ship of the legendary Bismarck. She displaced over 40,000 tons. Her main battery consisted of 8 15-inch guns. Since 1942, she had lurked in Norwegian fjords, threatening the convoy routes to the Soviet Union. The mere presence of this ship forced the Royal Navy to keep multiple capital ships in Scapa Flow. Tirpitz had never fought a major engagement. She did not need to. Her existence was weapon enough. Multiple attacks had failed to sink her. Midget submarines had damaged her propulsion. Fleet air-arm strikes had achieved little. Conventional bombing was hopeless against her armored deck. But the earthquake bombs were different. On September 15, 1944, 617 Squadron and 9 Squadron launched Operation Paravane. Flying from airfields in the Soviet Union, Lancasters carried Tallboys across occupied Norway to the fjord where Tirpitz lay at anchor. One bomb struck near the bow. It did not detonate inside the ship. Instead, it passed through the foredeck and hull, exploding in the water on the starboard side. The blast tore through the bow structure. 2,000 tons of water flooded the forward compartments. Hull plates buckled, bulkheads warped. Tirpitz was no longer seaworthy. German naval engineers estimated 9 months of dockyard work to repair the damage. Norway had no suitable facilities. The decision was made to use the battleship as a floating artillery battery. She was moved to shallower water near Tromsø. The British came again on October 29th, Operation Obviate. Cloud rolled in just before the attack. 32 bombs dropped blind. No direct hits. But one near miss bent a propeller shaft. Tirpitz could no longer move under her own power. The final operation came on November 12, 1944. Operation Catechism. Conditions were clear. 29 Lancasters carried Tallboys to Tromsø Fjord. 3 bombs struck the battleship directly. One penetrated between the forward turrets. A second hit amidships between the aircraft catapult and funnel, blowing a massive hole through the armored belt. A third struck near turret Caesar. The explosions were catastrophic. The hit amidships destroyed an entire section of belt armor. Water poured through a hole in the ship's side and bottom. Tirpitz began listing to port. Then the third hit triggered a magazine explosion. The battleship rolled. She capsized. When the water settled, her hull protruded from the fjord like the belly of a dead whale. Nearly 1,000 German sailors perished. The Tirpitz was gone. The Arctic convoy routes were secure, and Barnes-Wallis was already working on something bigger. Even as Tallboys proved their effectiveness, Wallis understood their limitations. A 12,000-pound bomb could devastate most targets, but the largest U-boat pens, the most massive concrete structures, sometimes survived. The earthquake effect required the bomb to penetrate and explode underground. Against the thickest fortifications, Tallboys sometimes broke up on impact before achieving full penetration. Wallis returned to his original calculations. A larger bomb would carry more explosive. It would have greater mass and momentum. It would penetrate deeper. The question was whether any aircraft could carry it. The answer came from modifications to the Lancaster bomber. If armament and equipment were stripped even more radically, if the bomb bay was completely opened, if more powerful engines were installed, the aircraft might lift a weapon twice the size of a Tallboy. Wallis began designing what he called Tallboy Large. When the press discovered and published the name Tallboy, security demanded a new designation. The massive weapon became Grand Slam. It weighed 22,000 pounds, 10 tons of steel, Torpex explosive, and aerodynamic precision. It was the largest conventional bomb used in the Second World War. The Grand Slam required new manufacturing techniques. The casing was made from a chromium molybdenum alloy steel, capable of withstanding impact forces that would shatter ordinary materials. English Steel Corporation in Sheffield undertook production. A concrete core accurate to 1/10,000th of an inch was made first. Then a sand-covered outer mold. Molten metal poured in. After cooling, workers chipped out the core by hand. Any hot spots during cooling could create structural flaws. Such bombs would break on impact instead of penetrating. The explosive filling process was equally demanding. Workers upended the 12-foot nose sections and poured in 9,200 pounds of Torpex, bucket by bucket. When the tail section was connected, the completed weapon measured 25.5 feet long. Nearly 8 meters of precision-engineered destruction. Flying a Lancaster carrying a Grand Slam required exceptional skill and nerve. The modified aircraft, designated BMK-1 Special, had no bomb bay doors. The front and mid-upper turrets were removed. Most defensive equipment was stripped. The crew was reduced to 5 men. Even so, the fully loaded aircraft weighed 72,000 pounds. When airborne with the Grand Slam, these Lancasters could barely maneuver. Pilots were instructed not to make minor corrections with the flying controls. The aircraft would wallow. Attempting to correct it could make the situation worse. If a crew had to return with their bombs still attached, they were forbidden from landing at their home base of Woodhall Spa. The runway was too short. They had to divert to Carnaby with its longer emergency strip. The first operational Grand Slam was dropped on March 14, 1945. The target was the Bielefeld Viaduct. This railway structure had already absorbed over 3,500 tons of conventional bombs in 54 separate attacks. Damage from 17 hits in one raid was repaired within 24 hours. The viaduct seemed indestructible. 15 Lancasters of 617 Squadron approached the target. 14 carried Tallboys. 1 carried the Grand Slam. The weather was far from ideal, with cloud around Bielefeld. The Grand Slam carrier had to approach from an unusual angle after resetting its bomb site. At 4:28 in the afternoon, from an altitude of just under 12,000 feet, far below optimal height, the first Grand Slam ever used in combat fell away. The Lancaster jumped 500 feet higher at the sudden loss of weight. The bomb took 35 seconds to reach the earth. It struck about 30 yards short of the viaduct and detonated. The site erupted. Tallboys followed. Observers could not distinguish the Grand Slam's effect from the other weapons, but reconnaissance photographs told the story. 200 feet of the North Viaduct had collapsed. 260 feet of the South Viaduct had disintegrated. 20,000 tons of rubble lay in the valley below. The Bielefeld Viaduct would never carry another train. Over the following weeks, Grand Slams systematically destroyed critical German infrastructure. The Arnsberg Viaduct fell on March 19th. 6 Grand Slams and 13 Tallboys brought down 2 spans and blocked a nearby tunnel entrance. A cameraman aboard an accompanying Lancaster filmed one Grand Slam as it fell, spinning, striking the western span, which simply disappeared in a cloud of debris. Railway bridges over the Weser River at Arbergen and Nienburg were demolished. Photographic evidence showed bridges collapsed into the water, spans blown off their piers, embankments shoved out of alignment. German rail communications to the Ruhr were being systematically severed. But the ultimate test of the Grand Slam would come against the target it was designed for, the Valentin submarine pens. We return now to that night of March 27th. The Valentin facility at Farge represented German engineering at its most ambitious. Construction had begun in 1943. The structure was colossal, 1,375 feet long, 315 feet wide, 96 feet above ground level, 41 feet below. The walls were reinforced concrete with arched trusses filled with more concrete. The roof was 15 feet thick and still being reinforced to 23 feet. Inside, the Germans planned to assemble Type 21 submarines. These revolutionary vessels incorporated advanced technology, streamlined hulls, high-capacity batteries, snorkel breathing systems. They could remain submerged far longer than conventional U-boats. They were faster underwater than on the surface. If production reached full capacity, they could restore Germany's stranglehold on Allied shipping. Conventional bombs could not touch Valentin. The massive structure had survived previous raids without significant damage. The concrete simply absorbed the explosions. But now 617 Squadron came with weapons designed specifically for such targets. 20 Lancasters took off from Woodhall Spa. 13 carried Grand Slams. 7 carried Tallboys. 1 aircraft returned shortly after takeoff with mechanical problems. Another turned back over the target with engine trouble, ditching its Grand Slam in the North Sea. The remaining 18 aircraft approached through moderate to heavy anti-aircraft fire. There was no fighter opposition. The German Luftwaffe was effectively finished. The bombers released their weapons within approximately 1 minute. Despite fuses set for 1-hour delays, 3 bombs exploded immediately upon impact. 14 bombs hit the submarine pens directly. 2 of those hits were Grand Slams. 1 was a Tallboy. They struck the unthickened portion of the roof on the western side. What happened next demonstrated exactly what Barnes-Wallis had envisioned. The Grand Slams penetrated 8 feet into the concrete before detonating. The explosions did not simply blow holes. They caused structural failure. Approximately 1,000 tons of the roof collapsed inward. 2 movable gantry cranes crashed down into the construction area. The thickened portion of the roof and a periscope testing tower were also damaged. Power stations, concrete mixing facilities, and shelters on the north side were wrecked by near misses. German Marines who had been inside the building during the attack provided testimony after the war. They described a massive concussive effect. The entire structure shook. Men were thrown from their feet, equipment toppled. The psychological impact was severe. Morale collapsed. Workers refused to return. Production never began. The Valentin submarine pens still stand today in Germany. The damage from the Grand Slams remains visible. Visitors can walk through the shattered structure and see where the bombs punched through what was supposed to be impenetrable armor. The holes are remarkably clean, almost surgical. The concrete around them is cracked and displaced. The earthquake effect did exactly what Barnes-Wallis predicted. After Valentin, 617 Squadron continued operations through the final weeks of the war. On April 9th, they attacked U-boat pens at Hamburg with Grand Slams and Tallboys. The facility had a roof reinforced with steel beams and trusses, 11.5 feet thick. 6 Tallboys penetrated part way, hit internal girders, and exploded. The detonations blew holes through the ceiling and deposited hundreds of tons of concrete into the pens below. 3,000 workers were inside. 27 were killed, 60 seriously injured. 2 submarines were damaged. The same day, Tallboy struck the pocket battleship Admiral Scheer at Kiel. 5 direct hits. The ship capsized in the harbor. A week later, the heavy cruiser Lutzow received similar treatment. A near miss with a Tallboy tore a massive hole in her bottom. She settled to the harbor floor. It was 617 Squadron's last loss of the war. 1 Lancaster fell to anti-aircraft fire during the attack. The final Grand Slam operations came against Heligoland. This island fortress in the North Sea protected the approaches to the Elbe and Weser rivers. Coastal batteries with 12-inch and 6-inch guns threatened any Allied naval approach. On April 18th, nearly 1,000 bombers attacked the anti-aircraft positions. The next day, 617 Squadron followed up with 6 Grand Slams and 14 Tallboys. The gun emplacements were destroyed. The islands were evacuated that night. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the earthquake bombs had written an indelible chapter in military history. 854 Tallboys had been dropped operationally. 42 Grand Slams, targets that had resisted thousands of conventional bombs, fell to a handful of precision weapons, U-boat pens, viaducts, bridges, battleships, rocket facilities. The concept that Barnes-Wallis had outlined in 1941 had proven devastatingly effective. The technical legacy extended beyond the war. Post-war tests at the Valentin pens and other targets allowed Allied weapons researchers to study the penetration capabilities of both bombs. The principles Wallis established, aerodynamic efficiency, high terminal velocity, heavy casing construction, delayed fusing, became the foundation for modern bunker-busting weapons. Every precision-guided penetration bomb used today traces its lineage to the earthquake bombs of World War II. But perhaps the more important legacy lies in what the bombs represent. They emerged from one engineer's refusal to accept that certain targets were invulnerable. Barnes-Wallis saw problems that conventional thinking declared unsolvable and found solutions. He understood that brute force was not enough. That precision and scientific understanding could multiply destructive power beyond anything simple explosive mass could achieve. The air crews who delivered these weapons also deserve recognition. Flying stripped-down Lancasters that could barely maneuver, carrying bombs that cost fortunes and were not to be wasted, approaching targets defended by the heaviest anti-aircraft concentrations Germany could muster, these men accepted extraordinary risks. 617 Squadron lost aircraft on multiple Tallboy missions. Crews who brought back their weapons had to land overweight aircraft on minimal fuel, knowing that any mistake could be fatal. The human cost of the earthquake bomb campaign was significant, but concentrated. Unlike area bombing raids that killed tens of thousands of civilians, the precision weapons were deployed against military and industrial targets, submarine pens, battleships, viaducts, launch facilities. The bombs were too expensive and too limited in number for anything but high-value strategic targets. This selectivity was partly economic and partly moral. Barnes-Wallis himself expressed discomfort with the mass casualties caused by conventional bombing. His weapons offered an alternative, destroying enemy capability without erasing entire cities. The submarine pens that survived the war still stand as monuments to both German engineering and its limits. At Brest, at Lorient, at Saint-Nazaire, the massive concrete structures remain. Some have been repurposed as museums. Others house commercial enterprises. The Tallboy and Grand Slam holes have been repaired in some cases, preserved in others. Visitors can stand in the shadows of these concrete cathedrals and contemplate what it took to breach them. One unexploded Tallboy from the Lutzow attack lay in the Piast Canal in Poland for 74 years. In September 2019, it was discovered during preparations for deepening the shipping channel. The bomb remained live. In October 2020, Polish Navy divers attempted to defuse it using a deflagration technique. The Tallboy detonated. Fortunately, no one was injured. The infrastructure survived, but the explosion proved that even 75 years later, these weapons retained their power. The story of the earthquake bombs is ultimately a story about the relationship between imagination and engineering. Barnes Wallis imagined a bomb that would make the earth tremble. Then he engineered it into existence. He faced skepticism, budget constraints, material limitations, and bureaucratic resistance. He overcame them through persistence, calculation, and proof of concept. When the Muna Dam broke in 1943, his bouncing bombs proved he understood physics better than his critics. When the first Tallboy collapsed a tunnel through 60 feet of rock, his earthquake theory was validated. When the Grand Slams punched through the roof of Valentin, his vision was complete. There is something both inspiring and disturbing about this legacy. Inspiring because it demonstrates what human ingenuity can accomplish. Disturbing because that accomplishment was destruction. The earthquake bombs saved Allied lives by ending the U-boat menace. They shortened the war by crippling German infrastructure. But they also killed. The sailors who drowned when Tirpitz capsized. The workers crushed beneath falling concrete at Valentin. The Marines and laborers who never returned from the Hamburg pens. War forces such calculations. The earthquake bombs were unquestionably military weapons deployed against military targets. The ethical clarity was greater than with area bombing, but clarity is not innocence. Every technological advance in warfare carries consequences. Barnes Wallis understood this. He spent his later years working on more constructive engineering challenges. But his earthquake bombs remained his most famous achievement. Modern bunker-buster weapons can penetrate far deeper than any Grand Slam. The American GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weighs 30,000 pounds and can pierce 200 feet of earth or 25 feet of concrete before detonating. Precision guidance ensures hits within feet of the aim point. But the fundamental concept, a heavy weapon designed to penetrate before exploding, remains what Barnes Wallis pioneered. The shell that punched through U-boat pens like hot knives through butter was not actually a shell. It was a bomb, an earthquake bomb, a weapon designed not merely to hit its target, but to bury itself before detonating, to turn the earth itself into a transmission medium for destructive energy, to collapse structures from below rather than blasting them from above. The metaphor of a knife through butter understates what these weapons achieved. They did not slice. They destroyed through physics. The men who dropped these bombs were not cavalier about destruction. They understood the terrible mathematics of warfare. Every U-boat pen destroyed meant submarines that would not hunt convoys. Every viaduct collapsed meant reinforcements that would not reach the front. Every battleship capsized meant one less threat to Allied ships carrying food and equipment to a starving fighting continent. That is the context that makes the earthquake bombs significant. They were not developed in isolation. They emerged from the desperate strategic situation of 1941 when Britain faced the U-boat menace alone, when convoys were being decimated in the Atlantic, when every ton of supplies that reached British ports represented a victory against starvation and defeat. Barnes Wallis understood this context. His earthquake bombs were tools for survival, for victory, for ending a war that consumed millions of lives. Whether those ends justified the means is a question that has no simple answer. But understanding the history requires understanding the stakes. The concrete roofs of the submarine pens represented Germany's attempt to make itself invulnerable to air attack. The earthquake bombs represented Britain's refusal to accept that invulnerability. In this technological duel, Britain won. But both sides demonstrated the extraordinary lengths to which nations will go when their survival is at stake. Today, the principles Barnes-Wallis established continue to shape military thinking. Deep bunkers require deep penetrating weapons. Precision reduces collateral damage. Science and engineering multiply destructive power. These are lessons written in the ruins of Bielefeld and Valentin and the silent hulk of Tirpitz, still buried in Norwegian mud. The story of the earthquake bombs is not merely history. It is a demonstration of how problems that seem unsolvable yield to imagination, persistence, and engineering rigor. Barnes-Wallis faced critics who said certain targets could not be destroyed. He proved them wrong. He did so not through luck or brute force, but through understanding of physics, understanding of materials, understanding of aerodynamics, and understanding of human determination. The air crews of 617 Squadron and 9 Squadron took that understanding into combat. They flew through anti-aircraft fire in vulnerable aircraft. They released weapons worth fortunes onto targets they sometimes could barely see. They landed overweight, fuel-starved bombers on runways that offered no margin for error. Some did not return. Those who survived carried memories of what they had done for the rest of their lives. That is the human dimension that makes this story worth remembering. Not merely the technical achievement, though that was remarkable. Not merely the strategic impact, though that was decisive, but the people. Barnes-Wallis in his office, calculating trajectories and impact forces. Workers at Sheffield hand-pouring molten steel into molds. Armorers at Woodhall Spa carefully winching 10-ton bombs into aircraft. Pilots nursing overloaded Lancasters into the air. Bomb aimers staring through SAB sights, making minute corrections while anti-aircraft shells burst around them. Those people made the earthquake bombs work. Those people punched through the concrete. Those people changed history. If this story of engineering, courage, and the devastation of war resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone interested in the technological side of World War II. Your comments about which aspects of this story most interested you help us understand what content to produce next. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next deep dive into military history. The night of March 27, 1945. 20 Avro Lancasters thunder through the darkness over northern Germany. Each crew knows what waits below them. The Valentin submarine pens, a concrete leviathan buried on the banks of the Weser River. 15 feet of reinforced concrete protect its roof. Inside, the Third Reich is assembling its last hope, the Type 21 submarine, a vessel so advanced it could change the tide of the Atlantic War.